Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Mistaken Identity by Stephanie R. Caffrey. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Evelyn. Evelyn Stevenson briskly walked through the jetway into the terminal and almost stopped. Heathrow was no Des Moines airport. The gray walls were all bare, and there was a distinct lack of signs directing her where to go. Crowds of people were bustling here and there, everyone trying to catch their flights like her. She had never seen so many people in one place before. Toto? She wasn't in Iowa anymore. Glancing around, she noticed most of the crowd was heading in one direction, so it was probably a safe bet to follow them. They probably knew better than she did. Besides, there should be signs that said where her connecting flight to Athens would be, right? Picking up her speed again, she began weaving in and out of the crowd. When Evelyn had booked the flight with the help of the Iowa State University Study Abroad office, they had assured her the layover would be plenty long enough. However, they obviously didn't take circling the city for half an hour before landing into account, nor the fact walking in the airport was akin to salmon swimming upstream. She hitched her duffel bag up higher on her shoulder. The weight of it dragged her shoulder down, acting as an anchor, slowing her pace through the airport. It was almost enough to make her regret filling it so full of her research for her thesis. Maybe she should have kept some books in her checked bag. Did she honestly think there would be an opportunity to work on her paper before arriving to the dig site at Epidaurus? As she got closer to her destination, at least Evelyn hoped it was, the denser the crowd became. Despite having to dodge people coming directly at her, she seemed to be making great time and might actually make her connecting flight. As the optimism of not being stranded in London went through her mind, someone collided headlong into her, causing them both to crash to the hard tile. Oi! Watch where you're going, mate! Evelyn looked up, trying to catch her breath after having the wind knocked out of her, and took in the woman she'd crashed into. Like herself, she had chin-length brown hair and brown eyes that were glaring at her. Evelyn opened her mouth to apologize, but the woman quickly stood, grabbed her duffel bag, and began running in the direction she'd been heading. Evelyn shook her head as the woman ran off and shrugged her shoulders before slowly pulling herself up from the ground. She picked up her bag and began walking toward the transfer station. Shifting the bag on her shoulder, she frowned. That was odd. That bag didn't feel the same as it had before. It was lighter. Significantly lighter. Looking at it, her frown deepened. This wasn't her bag. It was the same brand and model, but Evelyn's was black with purple trim. The one currently in her hand was black with blue trim. Fuck, she muttered under her breath. Looking in the direction where she should go, and then in the direction that a girl had rushed off with her bag, she began weighing her options. Thoughts of all those books and research currently in her bag, she hadn't checked it onto the plane for a reason. Evelyn needed what all was in there, and if that woman realized she had the wrong bag, she'd probably turn it into this terminal. She glanced at her watch. No matter how hard she tried, she would miss her connecting flight, so she might as well visit the ticketing counter in this terminal after she dealt with this bag switch situation. Frustrated, she headed in the opposite direction. Excuse me, she asked a random person. Do you know if there's an information desk or a lost and found anywhere close by? Yes, keep heading in this direction and the terminal will open into an atrium. You'll find a security desk there. They'll be able to help you. Thank you, Evelyn smiled and began going to where the Good Samaritan had pointed. Once reaching the atrium, the density of the crowds almost paralyzed her. It was so busy. She moved to a railing, bracing herself against it, and glanced down. From what she could determine, everything she needed was a level below her. Bustling with people, various types of restaurants and shops lined the perimeter of the lower level. In the center, there was a circular counter area marked information. That must be where she needed to go. The only downside was it was on the other side of the security line. She looked out toward the line for customs and bit her lip. Was it worth going through customs to get her bag back? On one hand, she really didn't want to wait in the really long line. On the other, she really needed her bag. Sighing, she figured she needed to rebook her flight anyway. It didn't matter if she was stuck on the other side of security. Besides, it would be fun to have an extra stamp in her passport. Optimism. After wading through what had to be the slowest line she'd ever been in, Evelyn descended on the escalator and began weaving her way through the crowds of people toward the kiosk at a brisk pace. Once the counter came into view, she began slowing down, but not before she slammed into someone coming the opposite direction. She gasped and held tight to the duffel bag, cursing herself for getting into the same situation twice in one trip. Maybe she should just rebook and go home. Was this all an omen? Sorry, the man she crashed into said with a thick British accent as he steadied her. She looked up and was taken aback. He had to be one of the most handsome men she'd ever seen. His features were very sharp and his blue eyes stood out against his dark eyelashes. Dark hair was cut close to his scalp. He was lean, muscular, and looked like he spent his free time in the gym. She was struck speechless and couldn't help but stare. Handsome and British. Evelyn had one weakness, and he'd slammed into her. She opened her mouth to respond to him, but he didn't give her a chance. He was pushing past her and moving through the airport. She watched him disappear into the crowd with slight regret. If only she had said something to him. Evelyn continued to make her way through the crowd toward her destination, and just as the kiosk was within striking distance, a hand tightly gripped her upper arm, stopping her. Excuse me, miss, but I think I can help you. The man's accent was thick. If you'll just come with me. She turned to look at the man. He was tall, and with her 5'3" height, she had to look up to view his face as he stood at least a foot taller than her. She gasped. It was the man she had just run into, Mr. Handsome and British, who she had immediately regretted not speaking to. Here he was, holding onto her arm, preventing her from moving. She involuntarily took a step back. What the? She was cut off by his large hand tightening its grip around her upper arm. She began to panic as he dragged her into the opposite direction of the kiosk. Evelyn tried to get away, but he overpowered her. When she tried to drag her heels to stop them, he moved his arm so it wrapped around her upper body and brought his other hand up, holding onto her mouth so she couldn't scream. She tried harder to plant her feet to slow down her abductor, but it didn't matter. He was too strong. Her gaze darted around, hoping someone would notice her abduction and put a stop to it, but everyone around them seemed so engrossed in their travels no one even glanced their way. She brought her hands up in a feeble attempt to pry his away, but it, too, was fruitless. Just as visions of being sent into the sex-to-slave trade began to fly through her head, they stopped moving. She narrowed her eyes in confusion before they moved again, entering a room. Her abductor closed the door behind them, trapping her. Her mind played different scenarios of things being done to her as full panic set in.